I don't think we'll go into an outright recession, but clearly we're in for a period of much weaker growth. And if you think about this from a historic perspective, normally coming out of a big recession, we should be growing 6-7% right now. This is an extremely disappointing recovery, so I think it's hard to describe this in positive terms.
It's disappointing, but Steve, people are flooding into treasuries like it's the end of the world again. I mean, we're seeing big moves on yields. Everyone's seeking safety. Is that justified? I mean, how bad is it going to get?
I am in the double dip camp. I think we're going to see negative GDP come out probably in the second half of this year. And my biggest concern is how does the markets respond when that develops? In and of itself, we should not see a really sharp additional downturn like we had seen in the original part of the recessionary environment. But what I'm concerned about is the degree of which confidence can be eroded rapidly and be transmitted through the financial press and lead to an even bigger second decline than my models would anticipate.
Is confidence the problem here? I mean, recoveries are messy. They're uneven. We went through a very serious credit crisis. Is it the worst thing in the world? Should we be that afraid of a double-dip recession?
I don't think we're facing a 1930s type situation here. I think we can go back a little bit closer period in history and look at some of the modern banking crises. We've had them in Scandinavia. We had it in Japan. And in order to go back into recession right now, as opposed to just being in an anemic state, I think we need some new shock, a big policy mistake, a big external shock. That's really what got Japan into their second recession when they were in serious trouble in the 1990s.
Is there a worry that we're running out of ammunition, especially when you're talking about deflation? Clearly the Fed's looking at that versus looking at trying to get the market, their operations back to normal. Does the Fed have a handle on what's going on, Ethan? Certainly a lot of discussion about the fact that maybe they don't.
I think the ammunition issue is important. I think the Fed still has some bullets left in their gun, but they're kind of lower caliber bullets, so they can step in, do a massive buying program in the Treasury market and drive interest rates down close to zero. The next step in this process has to be on the fiscal front. The U.S. government can still borrow at incredibly cheap rates, so the markets are willing to lend to the U.S. government. We need to have a continued stimulative fiscal policy. We shouldn't be talking about tax hikes right now.
I think there's a fundamental difference that hasn't been brought up here between previous business cycles and this business cycle. If you look at the U.S. economy and you split it down into the banking industry, the consumer, the non-financial corporate sector, and you go back and look at every other recession we've had, it's been one sector that's caused the problem. If you look at this particular recessionary environment, it's two. It's banks and consumers. The only other country that's experienced that is Japan, the corporate sector and the banks. And look at the Japan situation. And that's where I'm afraid we're actually focusing ourselves into a Japan scenario, because it takes time to correct one balance sheet problem, let alone having to correct two, where they're both intimately involved with each other.
You know, I have to say, I think the Japan risk is there for the U.S., but I think there are a couple very big differences and which make me think we will not go down the path of Japan. The main difference is policy. In Japan, they had a very crippled banking system, and there was no attempt to fix their banking system for more than a decade. So the banks sat in this crippled state. In the U.S., we have very aggressive recapitalization of banks. The other big difference is the Fed. The Fed learned from the Bank of Japan's mistakes, and Bernanke has been when push comes to shove, he will be very aggressive.
The difference may wind up being Japan has been suffering in this for 20-plus years. We may be in it for 5-plus years.
Right.
And we're only 2 into it.